She was 7 years old, barefoot, bleeding from fresh cuts on her knees, whispering, "Please don't let him find me," as she crawled under a Mafia boss's table. Seconds later, her stepfather Rage, twisting his face into something monstrous, kicked open the diner door, scanning the booths like a predator hunting wounded prey. And when his eyes locked onto the tattooed man shielding her, the entire room went dead silent. Because no one threatens Adamo Costa's table and leaves with their bones unbroken. If your chest tightened even a little for that girl hiding under the table, go ahead and hit subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Don't scroll past her like everyone else did that night. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And tomorrow I've got another story that'll leave you speechless. Alright, back to the story. Adamo Costa didn't look up when danger entered. He didn't have to. After 12 years controlling the most disciplined operation in the city, surviving betrayals, turf wars, and federal investigations that would have buried lesser men, he'd learned to read violence the way sailors read storms. By feel, by instinct, by the shift in the air before lightning strikes. The coffee in his ceramic mug had just begun to cool when he heard it. The desperate slap, slap, slap of bare feet on wet pavement outside, too fast, too uneven to be anything but terror in motion. This wasn't the tired shuffle of the late-night cook heading home. This wasn't the casual stride of a trucker stopping for pie and coffee. This was someone running from death itself. Then the door burst open. A small figure stumbled through dark, tangled hair plastered to her face, pink pajamas torn at the shoulder, eyes wide and glassy with shock. The child couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8. She scanned the near-empty diner with the frantic desperation of a hunted animal, and then her eyes locked onto Adamo. She didn't hesitate, didn't question. Some primal instinct made the choice for her. She darted across the black and white checkered floor and dove beneath his booth, her small body folding into the shadows between his leather boots and the worn vinyl seating. Across the table, Luca's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Beside him, Tony's hand drifted toward his waistband. The two men flanking the booth went rigid, their low conversation evaporating into the neon-soaked air like smoke. Adamo felt trembling fingers wrap around his ankle ice cold, slick with rain or sweat, or both. A voice rose from beneath the table, small and shattered. "Please don't let him take me." Adamo slowly lowered his tattooed hand beneath the table. A tiny palm pressed against his, shaking so violently he could feel her pulse hammering through her skin. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice gravel and smoke. Loud enough for his crew, but soft enough to anchor her. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." That's when the headlights slashed through the rain-streaked windows. A battered pickup truck, rust brown, one headlight flickering, roared into the parking lot with the reckless aggression of a bull charging red. The engine growled for 3 long seconds before cutting off with a violent choke. Then the door slammed open. A man emerged, broad-shouldered, wild-eyed, fists clenched so tight his knuckles glowed white under the street lamp. His shirt was half untucked, belt hanging loose, and his face was twisted into something that barely resembled human. Raymond Hale stepped into the diner like a storm given flesh. His eyes swept the room booth by booth, face by face, searching, and when his gaze finally landed on Adamo's table, on the man sitting calm and unmoving with tattooed hands resting flat on the table's edge, Raymond's lips curled into something between a snarl and a grin. "I'm looking for my stepdaughter," he growled, voice thick with barely contained violence. Little brat ran off. "You seen her?" The diner went silent. Every eye turned to Adamo. And Adamo, his expression carved from stone, his voice colder than the rain outside, lifted his gaze and met Raymond's eyes without flinching. "No," he said simply. "Haven't seen anyone." Raymond's jaw clenched. His fingers twitched toward his belt. But before he could move, before he could speak, Luca and Tony shifted in their seats, subtle, deliberate movements that made the bulges beneath their jackets unmistakable. Raymond's eyes flicked to them, then back to Adamo. For 5 heartbeats, the world balanced on the edge of violence. Then Raymond exhaled through his nose, slow and venomous. "She's mine," he hissed. "And when I find her, you won't." Adamo interrupted, his voice quiet but absolute. "Not tonight." Raymond stood there, trembling with rage, eyes locked on Adamo like he was memorizing his face for a future grave. Then he spat on the floor, turned on his heel, and stormed out. The truck engine roared back to life. Tires screeched. The red taillights vanished into the rain. Silence returned to the diner, thick, heavy, dangerous. Beneath the table, Janice Abrams pressed her face against Adamo's boot and sobbed silently. her entire body shaking with the kind of relief that only comes after survival. Adamo didn't move, didn't speak. He simply rested his hand on the edge of the table and waited until her breathing slowed. Then, quietly, he said, "Nobody touches that kid. Nobody hands her over. Understood?" Luca and Tony nodded. And in that moment, without realizing it, Adamo Costa declared war. The back office of Roscoe's diner smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke that had soaked into the walls over decades. Adamo sat on the edge of the worn desk, arms crossed, watching the girl who'd crawled under his table 20 minutes ago. Janice Abrams sat in an oversized leather chair, her bare feet dangling above the floor, still trembling despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Maria, the night shift waitress, had cleaned the dirt and blood from her knees and given her a glass of water that sat untouched on the desk. The child hadn't spoken since Raymond left. She just stared at the floor, her small hands gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Adamo had seen that look before. In his own mirror, years ago. In the eyes of his younger sister before the system swallowed her whole. It was the look of someone who'd learned that safety was a lie adults told children to keep them quiet. "You hungry?" Adamo asked, his voice softer than his men had ever heard it. Janice shook her head. "Thirsty?" Another shake. Luca shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. Tony stood beside him, both men looking like they'd rather be in a shootout than watching their boss try to coax words from a traumatized kid. Adamo leaned forward, elbows on his knees, making himself smaller, less threatening. "My name's Adamo," he said. "You don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to. But I need to know, is that man out there your father?" Janice's voice came out barely louder than a whisper. "Stepdad. Where's your mom?" "Gone." Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "She left when I was 5. Raymond said she didn't want me anymore." Adamo's jaw tightened. He'd heard that story too many times. The abandonment, the replacement, the step-parent who saw the child as an inconvenience at best, a punching bag at worst. "How long's he been hurting you?" Janice flinched at the word hurting, and Adamo knew the answer before she spoke. "He gets angry, a lot, especially when he drinks, or when I'm too loud, or when I'm in the way." Her voice cracked. "I try to be good, I really do, but it's never good enough." Maria made a soft sound in the corner, something between grief and rage. Adamo kept his expression neutral, his voice steady. Inside, something old and violent began to wake. "What made you run tonight?" Janice's hands twisted the blanket tighter. For a long moment, Adamo thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in fragments the way children speak when remembering nightmares, the story came out. "He had people over, 2 men in uniforms, police uniforms." She swallowed hard. "They were in the garage. I was supposed to be asleep. But I heard them yelling, so I looked through the window." "What were they doing?" "Opening boxes. Big metal boxes. There were guns inside. Lots of them." Her voice dropped even lower. "Raymond was counting money. The police were taking the boxes." Adamo exchanged a glance with Luca. "Illegal weapons. Corrupt cops. This wasn't just domestic violence anymore." "Did they see you?" Adamo asked carefully. Janice nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. One of them pointed at the window. "Raymond looked up and saw me. He got so mad, angrier than I've ever seen. He came inside screaming that I ruined everything, that I shouldn't have been watching, that I was going to." She couldn't finish. Her breathing turned ragged, panicked. Adamo moved slowly, crouching in front of her chair, so they were eye level. "Hey, look at me." He waited until her terrified eyes met his. "You're safe now. Whatever he said he was going to do, he's not doing it. Not while I'm breathing. He's going to come back," Janice whispered. "He always comes back. Then I'll be here when he does." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but the smallest flicker of hope. Tony cleared his throat from the doorway. "Boss," the kid said she saw this go down. "If they know she witnessed it." "I recorded it," Janice said suddenly. The room went dead silent. Adamo's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean you recorded it?" Janice reached into the pocket of her torn pajamas and pulled out a small pink tablet, the cheap kind they sold at discount stores, covered in butterfly stickers. "I was playing a game earlier, before they came. The recording app was still on. I didn't mean to, but..." She pressed the screen, and her voice, small and frightened, came through the speaker. "Mommy's favorite song." Then other voices. Male, aggressive. 20 crates. That's what we agreed on. "You're getting paid, aren't you? Take the damn guns and go. The gray circuit doesn't appreciate delays, Hale." Adamo's blood went cold. He knew that name. The gray circuit. Whispers in the Underground, a shadow organization that moved money, weapons, and worse through legitimate channels. Child trafficking, political corruption, they were untouchable because they were connected to everyone who mattered. And this 7-year-old girl had just recorded evidence that could burn their entire operation to the ground. Jesus Christ, Luca breathed. Adamo stood slowly, his mind racing through scenarios, each one more dangerous than the last. Raymond wasn't coming back for his stepdaughter. He was coming back for a witness. Adamo looked down at Janice, at the little girl who'd crawled under his table carrying a death sentence in her pajama pocket, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tony, get the car. Luca, call the safe house on Merchant Street. Tell them we're coming and to sweep the perimeter. His voice was pure command now. Nobody, and I mean nobody, gets within a block of that location without me knowing about it. He crouched down again, his tattooed hand resting gently on Janice's shoulder. We're leaving, right now. And I promise you, no matter what happens, you're not going back to that house. Ever. Janice looked up at him with eyes too old for 7 years. Why are you helping me? Adamo thought of his sister. Of every child the system had failed. Of every monster who'd been allowed to keep hurting because no one with power gave a damn. Because someone should have helped me once, he said quietly. And nobody did. The safe house on Merchant Street looked like every other row house in the neighborhood, peeling paint, rusted iron railings, windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. But behind the unremarkable facade sat reinforced steel doors, bulletproof glass, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor 3 city blocks. Adamo carried Janice inside while she slept against his shoulder, exhausted from fear and adrenaline. He'd wrapped her in his leather jacket during the car ride, and she'd clutched it like a lifeline until her eyes finally closed. He laid her gently on the couch in the main room, tucking the blanket around her small frame. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, her face finally peaceful in sleep. She looks so small, Maria whispered from the doorway. She'd insisted on coming, refusing to let Adamo handle this alone. Hard to believe she's carrying something that dangerous. Adamo pulled the pink tablet from his pocket, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. Get some rest, he told Maria. I'll take first watch. But sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. For the next 3 hours, Adamo sat at the dining table with Luca and Tony, playing the recording over and over, piecing together fragments of conversation like a deadly puzzle. The gray circuit doesn't appreciate delays, Hale. Tell Latimer we need the permits signed by Friday or the whole shipment's compromised. Those kids from the Riverside shelter, they're being moved Thursday night. Each replay made Adamo's blood run colder. Latimer, Tony said, tapping his finger on the table. That's Judge Malcolm Latimer. He's presided over half the custody cases in the city for the last decade. And he's signing permits for weapons shipments? Luca leaned back, running a hand through his hair. This is bigger than some dirty cops shaking down criminals. Adamo stared at the tablet screen, his mind working through connections he'd spent years mapping. The gray circuit wasn't just a name whispered in back alleys anymore. It was real, organized, powerful, and they were trafficking children. We need to know who else is involved, Adamo said quietly. Police, judges, city officials, anyone connected to Latimer and these shipments. Boss, Luca hesitated. Maybe we should hand this to the feds. Let them what? Adamo's voice went sharp. You heard that recording. Cops are already involved. How many federal agents do you think are on their payroll? How many prosecutors? We give this to the wrong person, and Janice disappears into the system. Or worse. The room fell silent. Tony shifted uncomfortably. So what's the play? Before Adamo could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Matteo De Laurentiis, his consigliere. Heard you picked up a stray. We need to talk. Tonight. Adamo's jaw tightened. News traveled fast in his world, but this was too fast. He'd only told 4 people about Janice, which meant someone was talking. Matteo arrived 20 minutes later, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his usual composure frayed at the edges. He'd been Adamo's right hand for 8 years, a strategic thinker, a problem solver, someone Adamo had trusted with his life more times than he could count. But tonight, something felt off. You're making a mistake, Matteo said the moment he walked through the door, not bothering with pleasantries. Taking in that kid. It's going to blow back on all of us. Adamo stood from the table, arms crossed. She's 7 years old and her stepfather was selling weapons to corrupt cops. What was I supposed to do? Hand her over to child services. Let the system handle it. Matteo's voice was clipped, urgent. You're putting the entire family at risk for one kid. The system? Adamo's voice dropped dangerously low. The same system that has judges signing off on weapons trafficking? The same system that's moving kids from shelters in the middle of the night? That system? Mateo stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not thinking clearly, Adamo. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. This girl, she's not your responsibility. She's not your sister. The air in the room went cold. Luca and Tony tensed, hands drifting instinctively toward their waistbands. Adamo took a slow breath, his eyes locked on Mateo's. Say that again. I'm saying you're making this personal when it should be business. Mateo's frustration was bleeding through now. We have operations across 6 districts. We have alliances that took years to build. You want to throw all of that away because some kid stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time? She didn't stumble. She ran. From a man who was going to kill her for witnessing something she shouldn't have seen. Adamo's voice was steel now. And yeah, Mateo, it is personal. Because when I was 10 years old, I watched my sister beg for help from people who were supposed to protect her. And they did nothing. So forgive me if I'm not willing to let history repeat itself. Mateo stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. You're going to get people killed, he said finally. People who've been loyal to you for years. Then they can walk away. Nobody's forced to stay. Adamo stepped back, creating distance. But that girl? She stays. End of discussion. Mateo's jaw worked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he shook his head slowly. I hope you know what you're doing, boss. He turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Tony let out a breath he'd been holding. That was weird, right? That wasn't just me? He's scared, Luca said quietly. Can't blame him. The gray circuit isn't something you go to war with lightly. Adamo walked to the window, watching Mateo's car pull away into the night. Something wasn't right. The urgency in Mateo's voice. The way he'd pushed so hard to get rid of Janice. The timing of his arrival. Double the security, Adamo said without turning around. And from now on, nobody knows our movements except the 3 of us. You think Mateo's compromised? Tony asked carefully. Adamo didn't answer. But as he watched the taillights disappear around the corner, one thought crystallized in his mind with terrible clarity. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. 3 days passed in tense silence. Janice barely spoke. She stayed close to Adamo, always within arm's reach, like a shadow afraid of losing its light. She ate when he told her to, slept curled up on the couch with her pink tablet clutched to her chest. And every time a car drove past outside, she flinched. Maria brought her clothes from a thrift store, jeans that were a size too big, a purple hoodie, sneakers with Velcro straps. Janice wore them without comment, her eyes distant, like she was waiting for the inevitable moment when this fragile safety would shatter. Adamo knew that feeling. He'd lived it. On the 3rd night, he made the call he'd been avoiding. We need to move her, he told Luca and Tony in the kitchen while Janice slept. This place is compromised. Too many people know about it. Where? Tony asked. The old marina property, north side. It's been off the books for 2 years, no records, no paper trail. We move after midnight when the streets are clear. Luca nodded. I'll prep the route. Side streets only, no highways. Adamo glanced toward the living room, where Janice's small form was barely visible under the blanket. She deserves better than this, he said quietly. Running, hiding, living like a fugitive. She's alive, Tony said simply. That's more than Raymond would have given her. Adamo knew he was right. But it didn't make the guilt any lighter. They left at 1:47 a.m. 2 cars. Adamo drove the lead vehicle with Janice in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, barely awake. Luca and Tony followed in the second car, maintaining a 2-block distance. The streets were empty, just the occasional drunk stumbling home, a few late-shift workers waiting at bus stops. The city had that hollow, suspended feeling it only gets in the dead hours before dawn. Janice sat up slightly, rubbing her eyes. Where are we going? Her voice was small, uncertain. Somewhere safer, Adamo said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Somewhere Raymond won't think to look. He'll find me. It wasn't fear in her voice anymore, just resignation. He always finds me. Not this time. Adamo turned onto Riverside Avenue, a narrow street lined with closed storefronts and abandoned warehouses. The route Luca had mapped out was solid, minimal traffic cameras, easy exits if something went wrong, but something already had. The first shot shattered the rear window. Glass exploded inward. Janice screamed. Adamo's instincts took over. He jerked the wheel hard right, slamming the car into the alley entrance as bullets punched through the trunk, The doors. The roof. Get down, Adamo roared. Head down. Now. Janice dropped to the floor, hands covering her head, sobbing. Through the spider-webbed windshield, Adamo saw them. 3 men on the rooftop across the street, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. 2 more emerging from a parked van, assault rifles raised. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. Adamo's phone buzzed Luca calling. We're boxed in! Luca's voice was sharp with adrenaline. 2 shooters on the east side, 1 blocking the exit behind us. Adamo slammed the car into reverse, tires screaming as bullets tore through the hood. Steam hissed from the radiator. The engine sputtered. They weren't getting out in the car. Stay down, Adamo told Janice, his voice deadly calm now. He pulled his gun from the holster under his jacket, checked the magazine. Don't move until I tell you. Understand? Janice nodded, tears streaming down her face. Adamo kicked open the driver's door and rolled behind the engine block just as gunfire erupted again. Rounds sparked off metal. 1 grazed his shoulder hot, sharp, adrenaline masking the pain. He returned fire. 2 shots. 3. One of the rooftop shooters dropped. Behind him, he heard Luca and Tony's car screeching to a halt. Doors opening. The sharp crack, crack, crack of their weapons answering the ambush. Adamo, Tony's voice. We got 2 down, but more coming from the north. Adamo fired again, keeping low. His mind was already calculating exits, angles, survival odds. Then he heard it. Janice's voice, small and terrified. Adamo. He turned. One of the shooters had flanked around the alley entrance. He was 15 feet away, rifle aimed directly at the car at Janice. Time fractured. Adamo didn't think. Didn't calculate. He lunged forward, throwing himself between the gunman and the car just as the rifle barked. The bullet hit him in the side, just below the ribs. White-hot pain, his vision blurred, but his gun was already up. 1 shot. The gunman dropped. Adamo collapsed against the car door, blood spreading across his shirt. Janice was screaming his name, her small hands reaching for him through the broken window. I'm okay, he gasped, though he wasn't sure if it was true. I'm okay, kid. Stay down. Luca appeared beside him, dragging him upright. Jesus, boss. Get her out, Adamo growled. Get her out now. Tony pulled the rear door open, scooping Janice into his arms. She fought him, reaching back toward Adamo. No, don't leave him. Go, Adamo shouted. Luca fired 3 more shots, covering their retreat. Sirens wailed in the distance finally, uselessly. Tony carried Janice to the second car while Luca half-dragged Adamo behind him. They piled in, tires screeched. The car rocketed down the alley, bullets chasing them into the darkness. In the back seat, Janice pressed her hands against Adamo's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her fingers were too small, too weak. You're hurt, she sobbed. You're hurt because of me. Adamo's hand covered hers, warm blood sticky between their fingers. Not because of you, he said, voice strained but certain. For you. There's a difference. 2 blocks away, in a parked sedan hidden in shadow, Matteo De Laurentiis lowered his phone. On the screen was a text message he'd sent 20 minutes before the ambush. Riverside Avenue, 1:45 a.m. Make it clean. He closed his eyes, jaw tight, and whispered to himself, I'm saving the family. I'm saving us all. Then he drove away into the night, leaving the sound of sirens and gunfire behind him. The makeshift medical room smelled like antiseptic and blood. Adamo sat shirtless on the edge of a metal table, while Dr. Rinaldi, a retired trauma surgeon who'd patched up more criminals than he cared to count, finished stitching the bullet wound in his side. You're lucky, Rinaldi muttered, tying off the last suture. Another inch to the left and you'd be bleeding out in an alley right now. Lucky, Adamo repeated flatly, wincing as the doctor wrapped bandages around his torso. Yeah, that's what I feel. Across the room, Janice sat in a chair far too large for her, knees pulled to her chest, watching Adamo with wide, guilt-stricken eyes. She hadn't spoken since they'd arrived at the new safe house, an abandoned dental office on the edge of the industrial district. Maria sat beside her, one arm around the girl's shoulders, whispering reassurances that clearly weren't working. She thinks it's her fault, Maria said quietly to Adamo. It's not. Adamo's voice was firm despite the pain radiating through his side. He looked directly at Janice. You hear me, kid? This isn't on you. Janice's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond. Dr. Rinaldi packed up his kit. Keep the wound clean, Change the dressing twice a day. And for God's sake, don't get shot again for at least a month. I'll try, Adamo said dryly. After the doctor left, Luca entered, his expression grim. We got a problem. Adamo stood slowly, pain flashing through his side. What now? Special Agent Elena Rowan. The Fed you reached out to 3 days ago? She just got arrested. The room went cold. Arrested for what? Bribery, evidence tampering, conspiracy. Luca pulled up a news article on his phone, showing Adamo the headline, Federal Agent Arrested in Corruption Scandal. Below it was a photo of Agent Rowan being led out of the FBI field office in handcuffs, her face pale, her eyes hollow with shock. Adamo read the article quickly, his jaw tightening with each sentence. Special Agent Elena Rowan, 38, was taken into custody this morning, following an internal investigation that uncovered evidence of accepting bribes from organized crime figures and falsifying federal warrants. This is bullshit, Adamo growled. Rowan's clean. I vetted her myself. Clean or not, she's in custody. And all the documents she was building on the gray circuit? Gone. Vanished from evidence lockup. Luca's voice dropped. Someone wiped the slate, boss. They erased everything she had. Tony appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and looked at Adamo with barely contained rage. Just got word from our guy at the courthouse. Judge Latimer signed the warrant for Rowan's arrest personally. Of course he did. Adamo leaned against the table, his mind racing through the implications. Agent Rowan had been their only legitimate connection to the federal system, someone who could take Janice's recording and turn it into actionable prosecutions. Now she was facing prison herself. And whoever was behind it had just sent a very clear message. We can reach anyone. We can destroy anyone. You can't win this. They're cleaning up, Adamo said quietly. Tying off loose ends. Anyone who gets close to the truth gets buried. So what do we do? Tony asked. Adamo looked at Janice, still curled up in that chair, still carrying the weight of a world that wanted her dead. We go to war, he said simply, but smarter. No more reaching out to feds. No more trusting the system. We handle this ourselves. Luca shifted uncomfortably. Boss, I'm with you. You know I am. But taking on the gray circuit alone? That's suicide. Then we don't go alone. Adamo grabbed his shirt, pulling it on carefully over the bandages. We find their enemies, people they've burned, rivals who want them gone as badly as we do. We build an alliance. And the girl? Tony glanced at Janice. She can't keep running forever. She won't have to. Adamo's voice hardened. Because we're going to end this. Permanently. Later that night, after Maria had finally coaxed Janice into sleeping, Adamo sat alone in the dark office, staring at the pink tablet on the desk. The recording played softly through the speaker. The gray circuit doesn't appreciate delays. Hale, those kids from the Riverside shelter, they're being moved Thursday night. He replayed it. Again. And again. There was something in the background he hadn't caught before. A sound. Faint, but distinct. He leaned closer, turning up the volume. A train horn. Then a voice in the distance. Platform 6. Last call for Newark. Newark Station. Adamo's eyes narrowed. The recording wasn't made at Raymond's house. It was made somewhere near the train station, which meant Raymond had been moving the weapons through public transit, hiding in plain sight, using the crowds and constant motion to mask the transfers. And if that was true, then there were records, security footage, transit logs, evidence that couldn't be wiped as easily as federal documents. Adamo pulled out his phone and texted an old contact, someone who owed him favors and had access to the city's transit surveillance system. Need footage from Newark Station. 3 nights ago. All platforms. Send it encrypted. The response came 2 minutes later. You got it, but be careful. Word is someone's been asking about you. High-level inquiries. Federal. Adamo stared at the message. Federal. Not the gray circuit. Not Raymond's people. Someone else was watching. He deleted the conversation and stood, walking to the window. The industrial district stretched out below, dark, silent, indifferent. Behind him, the door creaked open. Matteo stepped inside, his face carefully neutral. Heard about Rowan, he said. That's rough. Adamo didn't turn around. Yeah, rough. Makes you wonder who you can trust anymore, doesn't it? Something in Matteo's voice made Adamo's spine stiffen. He turned slowly, studying his consigliere's face in the dim light. It does, Adamo said carefully. Makes you wonder who's really on your side. Matteo held his gaze for a long moment. I'm just saying maybe it's time to reconsider this whole thing. Hand the girl over to someone who can protect her properly. Before more people get hurt. She's staying with me. Even if it costs you everything? Adamo stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Especially then. Mateo's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. Then he nodded slowly. Your call, boss. He left without another word, and Adamo stood there in the darkness, the cold certainty settling over him like snow. The enemy wasn't just outside anymore. They were already inside. The explosion happened at 4:17 a.m. Adamo jolted awake on the couch, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun on the coffee table. The wound in his side screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. Across the room, Janice sat up, eyes wide with terror. What was that? She whispered. Before Adamo could answer, his phone erupted with calls. Luca, Tony, 3 other crew members. He answered Luca first. Boss, static crackled. The Merchant Street house, it's gone. Completely gone. Adamo's blood turned to ice. What do you mean gone? Blown to hell. Someone planted explosives in the walls. The whole building collapsed. Luca's voice was shaking. If we'd still been there. Casualties. 2 of our guys were doing a final sweep before shutting it down permanently. They didn't make it out. Adamo closed his eyes, grief and rage warring in his chest. Carlo and Dominic, both good men, both loyal, both dead because someone had sold them out. Get everyone to the backup location on 5th, Adamo said, his voice cold and controlled. Nobody moves alone. Nobody trusts phone calls unless it's a verified code word. Understand? Understood. Adamo ended the call and looked at Janice. She was trembling, the blanket clutched around her like armor. We're leaving, he said quietly. Right now. 20 minutes later, they were in the car, Adamo driving despite the pain. Janice in the back seat with Maria, Tony riding shotgun with his weapon ready. The streets were still dark, the city barely awake. But Adamo's mind was racing, connecting pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to ignore. The ambush on Riverside Avenue, someone had known the exact route, the exact time. Agent Rowan's arrest too convenient, too perfectly timed. Mateo's sudden urgency to get rid of Janice, not concern, but panic. And now the safe house bombing. Only 5 people had known they'd evacuated that location. Adamo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Boss, Tony said carefully, reading his expression. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we have a traitor. The word hung in the air like poison. Maria leaned forward from the back seat. You can't be serious. Everyone in the crew would die for me. I know. Adamo's voice was bitter. But someone's feeding information to the Gray Circuit. Someone close enough to know our movements. Our safe houses. Our contacts. Tony's jaw clenched. You thinking what I'm thinking? Adamo didn't answer. He didn't need to. They arrived at the 5th Street location, just as dawn began bleeding gray light across the city. It was an old mechanic's shop abandoned for years, windows boarded up, the perfect place to disappear. Luca was already there, pacing like a caged animal. His face was streaked with soot from the explosion site. Carlo and Dominic, he said when Adamo entered. His voice cracked. I saw the bodies, what was left of them. Adamo gripped his shoulder. We'll honor them, but first we end this. How? We don't even know who. The door opened behind them. Mateo walked in, his suit pristine despite the early hour, his expression carefully composed. Thank God you're all safe, he said. When I heard about the explosion. How did you hear? Adamo's voice was quiet, dangerous. Mateo blinked. What? The explosion. How did you hear about it? Adamo stepped closer. I didn't call you. Luca didn't call you. So how did you know? Mateo's face flickered just for a second before the mask returned. One of the guys texted me. I don't remember who. Show me. What? Your phone. Show me the text. The silence stretched like a blade. Mateo's hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. His eyes darted to the exits, calculating, desperate. And in that moment, Adamo knew. It was you, not a question, a statement. Mateo's shoulders sagged. The pretense crumbled. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Adamo's voice was ice. You sold us out. You told them about Riverside Avenue. You made sure Rowan got arrested. You gave them the safe house location. I was protecting the family. Mateo's voice rose, defensive. You were so focused on that girl you couldn't see what was happening. The gray circuit was going to come after all of us. They have judges, cops, politicians. We can't win against them. So you surrendered before the fight even started. I made a deal, Mateo shouted. They promised if we handed over the girl and the recording, they'd leave the rest of us alone. The organization would survive. Everyone else would be safe. Except Janice. Adamo's voice dropped to something lethal. Except a 7-year-old child. She's one kid versus the entire family. Don't you see? I did this for you. For all of us. Tony moved, his gun half drawn, but Adamo raised a hand, stopping him. You did this because you're a coward, Adamo said quietly. Because when it mattered, you chose easy over right. Mateo's face twisted with anger and shame. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a criminal, Adamo. Just like me. Just like all of us. Don't pretend. The door burst open. Gunfire erupted. Luca dove left. Tony returned fire. Adamo grabbed Janice, shielding her with his body as bullets tore through the walls. 4 men poured through the entrance, Raymond's people, weapons raised, moving with military precision. And Mateo, standing frozen in the middle of the chaos, realized too late what he'd done. No, he screamed. We had a deal. You said. One of the gunmen shot him in the chest. Mateo collapsed, blood spreading across his expensive shirt, his eyes wide with betrayal. Adamo fired back, dropping one attacker. Tony got another. But more were coming through the back entrance. Go! Luca shouted, providing cover fire. Get her out! Adamo didn't hesitate. He scooped Janice into his arms and ran for the side exit, Maria right behind him. Behind them, Mateo crawled across the floor, choking on his own blood, reaching out with one trembling hand. Adamo, he gasped. I'm sorry, I thought. Another explosion rocked the building. The ceiling groaned. Luca grabbed Mateo, trying to drag him toward the exit, but the consigliere's weight was too much, and the attackers were closing in. Leave me, Mateo wheezed. Just tell him I tried. The attackers were 10 feet away. Mateo's hand found the gun that had fallen beside him. With the last of his strength, he raised it and fired not at the attackers, but at the gas line running along the wall. Run! He screamed. Luca bolted for the exit just as the explosion consumed the building. Adamo burst through the side door carrying Janice, the blast wave throwing them forward onto the pavement. He twisted in midair, taking the impact on his injured side, gasping in agony but never letting go of the child. Maria pulled them both up. Tony and Luca stumbled out seconds later, coughing, covered in debris. Behind them, the mechanic's shop was an inferno. And somewhere in that fire, Mateo De Laurentiis burned his betrayal and his redemption reduced to ash. Janice clung to Adamo's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. I'm sorry, she kept repeating. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Shh. Adamo held her tighter despite the pain. You have nothing to be sorry for. But as he watched the flames consume what was left of his crew's sanctuary, one truth crystallized with terrible clarity. They were out of safe houses, out of allies, out of options. The only way forward now was straight through the fire. They drove in silence. The stolen van's engine rattling like death itself was chasing them. Maybe it was. Adamo's shirt was soaked through with blood. The stitches from his gunshot wound had torn open during the explosion. Every breath felt like broken glass grinding against his ribs. But he kept driving, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant leaving Janice alone. In the back of the van, Janice sat between Maria and Tony, her face buried against Maria's shoulder. She hadn't spoken since they'd escaped the fire, just cried silently, her small body shaking with each sob. Luca sat in the passenger seat, his phone buzzing constantly. He ignored every call. They're tracking us somehow, he said finally. That's 3 locations they've hit in 48 hours. Someone's feeding them real-time intel. Mateo's dead, Tony said from the back. Who else could it be? I don't know. Adamo's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. But we can't keep running. We need to make a stand. Where? Luca asked. Every safe house we have is compromised. Adamo's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. Then something clicked, a memory from years ago, before the organization grew, before the territory wars, when it was just him and a handful of loyal men trying to survive. The old warehouse on Pier 17, he said. The one we used for storage before the feds raided it in 2019. Luca turned to look at him. Boss, that place has been abandoned for 6 years. No power, no security. Half the roof is collapsed. Exactly. Nobody remembers it exists. Not even Mateo knew about it. I acquired it under a shell company before he joined. Adamo glanced in the rearview mirror at Janice, It's not much, but it'll buy us time. Time for what? Tony asked quietly. To end this. Adamo's voice was steel. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. Raymond wants the girl. Let him come for her. But this time we're ready. Pier 17 looked like something from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. The warehouse was a skeletal ruin, rusted metal beams jutting toward the sky, walls tagged with graffiti, windows shattered into jagged teeth. The smell of rotting fish and stagnant water hung heavy in the air, but it had something the other locations didn't. Clear sightlines in every direction and only 2 entrances to defend. Adamo parked the van inside, wincing as he climbed out. Maria immediately moved to check his wound, but he waved her off. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your shirt. I said I'm fine. His voice was harsher than he intended. He softened it. Check on Janice. Make sure she's okay. Maria nodded, though her eyes said she didn't believe him for a second. Luca and Tony began fortifying the entrances, stacking old crates, setting up what little ammunition they had left, positioning themselves for maximum coverage. Adamo climbed the rusted stairs to the 2nd level, looking out over the pier. Dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Footsteps behind him, small, hesitant. Janice stood at the top of the stairs, her purple hoodie torn, her face streaked with soot and tears. You should be resting, Adamo said gently. I can't sleep. Her voice was barely audible. Every time I close my eyes, I see fire. Adamo crouched down to her level, ignoring the pain that lanced through his side. I know. I'm sorry you have to see all this. People keep dying because of me. Janice's eyes filled with tears again. Matteo, Carlo, Dominic, all those people at the building. It's my fault. No. Adamo's voice was firm. Listen to me, Janice. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to witness what you saw. You didn't ask Raymond to be a monster. And you sure as hell didn't ask to be hunted by criminals. But if I hadn't recorded, then Raymond would have killed you that night and buried the evidence. Adamo placed his hands on her shoulders. You survived. You were brave enough to run. And because of that recording, we have a chance to stop people who hurt kids like you. That's not something to feel guilty about. Janice looked up at him with eyes too old for 7 years. Are we going to die? The question hung in the air like smoke. Adamo could have lied, could have told her everything would be okay, that heroes always win, that good always triumphs. But she deserved the truth. I don't know, he said quietly. Maybe. But if we do, it'll be because we fought back. Because we didn't let them win without making them bleed for it. I'm scared. Me too, kid. Me too. He pulled her into a hug, careful of his injury, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing left in a world that had tried to break her. From below, Tony's voice cut through the moment. Boss, we got company. Adamo released Janice, standing quickly. He looked out over the pier. 3 black SUVs were rolling toward the warehouse, moving slowly, deliberately. Hunters who knew their prey was cornered. Get downstairs, Adamo told Janice. Stay with Maria. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand? Janice nodded, terror written across her face. Adamo descended the stairs, his gun already drawn. Luca and Tony took positions behind the barricades. Maria pulled Janice behind a stack of old shipping containers, wrapping her arms protectively around the girl. The SUVs stopped 50 yards out. Doors opened. 8 men emerged heavily armed, wearing tactical gear. Professional, efficient. And leading them, stepping out of the center vehicle with a shotgun in his hands, was Raymond Hale. His face was gaunt, eyes wild with sleepless rage. He'd lost weight, lost his clean-cut appearance. He looked like what he truly was, a desperate animal backed into a corner. Adamo Costa. Raymond's voice echoed across the pier. I know you're in there. Send out the girl, and maybe I let the rest of you walk away. Adamo stepped into the warehouse entrance, silhouetted against the morning light. She's not going anywhere with you. Raymond laughed, a broken, manic sound. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a criminal, a thug. You have no right. I have every right. Adamo's voice cut through the air like a blade. Because when that girl needed help, I was there. Where were you? Oh, right, selling guns and beating children. Raymond's face twisted with rage. Kill them, he snarled to his men. Kill them all. The warehouse exploded into violence. The first volley of gunfire was a deafening roar that chewed into the rusted metal walls, sending shrapnel and splinters flying through the dusty air. Adamo threw himself back behind a stack of steel cargo containers. the impact jarring a grunt of pain from his lips as his torn stitches screamed in protest. "Luca! East wall!" he barked, peering around the container's edge. Luca's response was 2 precise shots. A man on the far right crumpled. One down. From behind a forklift, Tony laid down, suppressing fire, the sharp cracks of his pistol echoing. "They're flanking left. I count 6, plus Raymond." Janice's whimper was a small, sharp sound buried beneath the gunfire. Maria had her pinned to the floor behind the most fortified stack of containers, a hand clamped over the girl's mouth, her own face a mask of terror. Adamo's mind, cold and calculating, processed the battlefield. They were outgunned, outmanned, and cornered. Raymond's men moved with a brutal efficiency, using the SUVs for cover and advancing in a practiced, alternating pattern. This wasn't a gangland brawl. This was a tactical assault. "We can't hold them here!" Tony yelled, ducking as a bullet sparked off the forklift's mast. "We're pinned." Raymond's voice cut through the brief lull in shooting, manic and triumphant. "Out of hiding holes, Costa? Gonna die in this dump for a brat that isn't yours." Adamo's gaze swept the cavernous space, past the peeling posters and rotting crates, and landed on a rusted metal door nearly hidden behind a curtain of old canvas tarps. The emergency exit. It was their only chance. "Luca! Suppressing fire on my mark! Tony, you get Maria and the girl to that rear exit," Adamo commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "Do not stop. Do not look back." "What about you?" Luca shouted, reloading his weapon with practiced speed. "I'm right behind you, now." Luca rose and unleashed a hailstorm of bullets toward the SUVs, forcing Raymond's men to duck. In that precious window, Tony bolted from his cover, grabbing Maria's arm and pulling her up. Maria, in turn, hauled a sobbing Janice to her feet. "Run!" Tony roared. They sprinted for the rear door, Janice's small legs pumping, her breaths coming in ragged, terrified gasps. Adamo provided cover, firing until his slide locked back on an empty magazine. He ejected it, slammed in a fresh one, and continued, his eyes never leaving his men's retreating backs. Tony hit the rusted door at a full run, shoulder-checking it. It burst open with a shriek of protesting metal, revealing a narrow alley choked with weeds and leading to the main street beyond. "Go! Go! Go!" Maria and Janice vanished into the alley. Tony followed, turning to cover Adamo's retreat. "Boss, now!" Adamo fired 2 final shots and broke into a sprint, his injured side a blaze of agony with every step. He was 10 feet from the door when a shotgun blast from Raymond tore a chunk out of the doorframe beside Tony's head. "No, you don't!" Raymond screamed, charging forward, his face a twisted mask of fury. Luca, still providing cover, stood to draw fire. It was a heroic, fatal mistake. A burst from an assault rifle caught him in the chest and leg. He cried out, stumbling backward, his weapon clattering to the concrete floor. "Luca!" Adamo skidded to a halt, turning back. "Go!" Luca gasped, blood already soaking his jacket. He looked at Adamo, his eyes wide with pain but clear with purpose. "Get her out! Go!" It was the same choice Matteo had forced upon him. The family, or the girl. Adamo's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth would crack. With a final, agonized look at his loyal soldier, he turned and lunged through the doorway. "Move!" he yelled at Tony, shoving him into the alley. He slammed the heavy metal door shut, spotting a rusted metal bar leaning against the wall. He jammed it through the handles, a flimsy, temporary barricade. It would hold for seconds, maybe. The sound of fists and gun butts pounding on the other side of the door began immediately. "The van!" Adamo ordered, and the 3 of them, Adamo, Tony, and a terrified Janice clutched in Maria's arms, sprinted down the alley. The stolen van was where they'd left it, a block away. They piled in, Adamo wrenching the driver's door open and ignition roaring to life just as the warehouse's rear door burst open behind them. He didn't look back. He stomped on the accelerator, the van lurching forward and screeching around a corner, leaving the sounds of the firefight and Luca behind. They drove in a silence broken only by Janice's muffled sobs and Tony's heavy, grief-stricken breathing. The van was a rolling tomb, carrying the ghosts of their fallen. Carlo, Dominic, Matteo, and now, almost certainly, Luca. The cost was being tallied, and the bill was written in blood. After 20 minutes of weaving through side streets, Adamo spoke, his voice hollow. "They'll have every safe house, every bolt hole covered." Matteo saw to that. "So where?" Tony asked, the fight gone from his voice. We sleep in this van? Adamo's eyes, reflected in the rearview mirror, met Janice's. He saw the trust there, fragile but unbroken, a tiny flame in a howling dark. He saw the memory of a checkered floor and a hand under a table. No, he said, the plan forming with crystalline clarity. We go back. To the beginning. Tony stared at him. You can't mean. Roscoe's, Adamo confirmed, his voice gaining a sliver of its old steel. It's the one place he'd never expect us to be. He thinks we're animals, running for the deepest hole. We don't run. We dig in. When they pulled into the alley behind the familiar diner, the sun was beginning to set, painting the brick walls in hues of orange and purple. It looked deceptively peaceful. Inside, the diner was exactly as they'd left it, frozen in time. Adamo's booth sat empty, a silent monument to the night this all began. The weight of the circle closing was immense. As Tony and Maria began the grim work of barricading the windows and doors, Adamo led Janice to the booth. He slid in, and she, after a moment's hesitation, slid in opposite him, mirroring their first meeting. This ends tonight, he told her, his voice low and steady. Right here. He reached beneath the table, his fingers finding a seam in the old wood. With a quiet click, a small, recessed button was revealed. Janice's eyes widened. This is a panic switch, he explained. It doesn't call the police. It sends a signal to the only person left I'd trust with my life. If I tell you to, you press it. Don't ask. Don't hesitate. Can you do that? Janice stared at the button, then at his face. The fear in her eyes was being slowly replaced by a grim resolve. She gave a single, firm nod. I can do it. Good girl, he said, his voice softening for the first time in days. We finish this together. As darkness fell completely, the street outside grew quiet, too quiet. The final, tense wait had begun. Janice didn't hide. She sat in the booth, her small hand resting on the table near the hidden switch, waiting. The hunted child was gone. In her place was a witness, ready to see it through. Headlights suddenly flooded the boarded-up windows. Doors slammed. A familiar, rage-twisted voice shattered the silence. Costa, I know you're in there. Adamo slowly stood up, a king returning to his throne to face his usurper. He looked at Janice one last time. Remember your promise. Then he turned to face the door. A solid, unyielding figure in the dim light of the diner. She's not yours to take, Raymond, he said, his voice carrying through the door, calm and absolute. Come and try. Raymond's answer was a wordless roar of fury, followed by the thunderous crash of a boot against the diner's front door. The wooden barricade Tony had built splintered, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. Positions, Adamo said, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the storm breaking outside. Tony melted into the shadows of the kitchen doorway, pistol raised. Maria stood behind the counter, a sawed-off shotgun resting on the Formica top, her hands steady. Adamo remained standing before his booth, a dark silhouette, making himself the target. The door burst inwards, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Raymond stood framed in the entrance, backlit by the streetlights, a shotgun in his hands. His eyes were wild, his face a grotesque mask of sleepless rage and desperation. He wasn't the calculated predator from the first night. He was a rabid dog, backed into a corner and ready to bite. Where is she, Costa? He snarled, his chest heaving. She's under my protection, Adamo replied, not moving a muscle. That's the only answer you get. Raymond's lips peeled back from his teeth. He raised the shotgun, aiming directly at Adamo's chest. Wrong answer. Before he could pull the trigger, two figures in police uniforms stepped out of the darkness behind him, flanking him. They moved with an arrogant swagger, their service pistols drawn and aimed into the diner. Officer Miller and Officer Shaw, the same men from Janice's recording. It's over, Costa, Miller said, his voice slick with a sense of power. You're harboring a material witness. You're obstructing a police investigation. Step aside and hand the girl over, and maybe you only do 20 years. Adamo didn't even glance at them. His eyes remained locked on Raymond. You brought cops to do your dirty work now, Hale? Couldn't finish it yourself? They're here to make it official, Raymond spat. To clean up the mess you made? From her hiding place under the table, Janice trembled, her small body pressed into the shadows between Adamo's boots and the worn vinyl seat. She could see their shoes, hear the venom in their voices. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the sound of the recording played in her mind. 20 crates, that's what we agreed on. These were the same men. The gray circuit sends its regards, Shaw added with a cold smile. They don't like loose ends. That was the signal. Adamo gave a barely perceptible nod. Tony, from the kitchen, fired once. The shot was impossibly precise, tearing the shotgun from Raymond's grasp and sending it clattering across the checkered floor. Raymond screamed, clutching his bleeding hand. Chaos erupted. Miller and Shaw opened fire, their bullets shattering the remains of the front window and pocking the walls. Tony returned fire from the kitchen, pinning them in the doorway. Maria fired the shotgun from behind the counter, the deafening blast chewing a hole in the wall next to the entrance. Adamo used the distraction. In one fluid motion, he dropped into the booth, his body shielding Janice's hiding spot. "Get ready," he murmured to the space beneath the table. Raymond, ignoring his wounded hand, scrambled for his fallen shotgun. Miller, taking cover behind the doorframe, yelled into his radio. "We're taking fire. Officer down. All units to Roscoe's diner. He's got the child hostage." The lie was seamless. They were framing him, turning the entire police response against him. "They're calling everyone," Tony yelled over the gunfire. "We'll be surrounded by real cops in minutes." Adamo knew the plan had just collapsed. The panic switch would bring his one trusted contact, but not an army, and not in time. They were about to be buried under a wave of blue uniforms, all convinced they were the villains. Raymond got his hands on the shotgun, a triumphant scream on his lips. He swung it toward the booth, toward Adamo, toward the spot where he knew his stepdaughter was hiding. "Now, Janice," Adamo roared. Under the table, Janice's eyes snapped open. The world had narrowed to the sound of Adamo's voice and the small, recessed button her fingers had been resting on. There was no more fear, only a cold, clear purpose. She thought of the recording. She thought of the kids from the Riverside shelter. She thought of Adamo's hand resting on her head. She slammed her small palm down on the button. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The gunfire continued. Raymond took a step forward, leveling the shotgun. Then, a new sound cut through the din, the powerful, guttural roar of a heavy engine, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. A massive black SUV, its grille like a snarling mouth, plowed through the remains of the diner's front wall. It didn't stop. It T-boned Raymond's parked truck outside, shoving it aside like a toy, before screeching to a halt in the middle of the devastation. Its headlights blinding the corrupt cops. The passenger door flew open. A woman in a tactical vest, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, emerged, moving with a fluid, deadly grace. She raised a rifle, her voice cutting through the sudden silence like a whip crack. "Federal agent, drop your weapons. Miller, Shaw, you are under arrest for conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and corruption." It was Elena Rowan. She wasn't in prison. She wasn't broken. She was free, and she was furious. Behind her, more figures in FBI vests swarmed through the breached wall, weapons trained on the stunned officers. Raymond, momentarily forgotten in the shocking turn of events, saw his chance. His stepdaughter was right there, just under that table. He could still grab her, use her as a shield, escape in the chaos. He lunged for the booth. He never made it. Adamo was already moving. He rose from the booth like a specter of vengeance, his own weapon forgotten. As Raymond lunged, Adamo met him with a raw, brutal right hook that connected with a sickening crack. Raymond's head snapped back. Before he could fall, Adamo grabbed him by his collar and belt, and with a guttural roar fueled by weeks of pent-up rage and protectiveness, he physically threw the larger man across the room. Raymond Hale crashed through the remnants of the counter, sending glasses and coffee mugs shattering to the floor, and landed in a broken, unmoving heap beside Maria's feet. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the hiss of the SUV's radiator and the frantic radio chatter of the surrounding federal agents. It was over. Adamo stood panting, his knuckles bleeding, his sides screaming in agony. He ignored it all. He turned and slowly crouched down, peering under the table. Janice was still there, curled into a ball, her eyes wide as saucers, her entire body trembling. "It's okay," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "It's over. You can come out now." He reached out a hand. Tentatively, her small, cold fingers slipped into his. He helped her out from under the table, the very spot where she had first begged for his help. She stood on shaky legs, looking at the destruction, the shattered front of the diner, the swarming federal agents, Raymond's unconscious form being handcuffed. She wasn't crying. She was just staring, trying to understand that the nightmare was truly, finally, over. Agent Rowan approached, holstering her weapon. She looked from Adamo to Janice, her expression unreadable. "The button works," Adamo said simply. A ghost of a smile touched Rowan's lips. "I told you it would." She looked at Janice. "You're Janice Abrams? You're very brave." Janice didn't answer. She just moved closer to Adamo, pressing herself against his leg, her hand still clutching his. He rested his tattooed hand on her head, a gesture that had become their silent language of safety and promise. In the flashing red and blue lights now painting the diner's ruins, they stood together, the Mafia boss and the little girl, as the empire that had hunted her crumbled around them. The flashing lights of a dozen federal vehicles painted the shattered diner in pulses of electric blue and bloody red. The air, once thick with gunpowder and rage, now smelled of spilled gasoline and cold night air whistling through the broken wall. Agents swarmed, their voices a low, professional hum as they catalogued evidence, read rights, and led the handcuffed traitors Miller, Shaw, and a groaning, defiant Raymond away. In the center of the devastation, an island of stillness existed. Adamo stood, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, the other resting protectively on Janice's head as she clung to his leg. She watched Raymond being shoved into the back of an armored truck, his face a final, twisted snapshot of hatred before the doors slammed shut, locking him away from her forever. A shudder ran through her small frame, but it was not a shudder of fear. It was the last tremor of a ghost finally being exorcised. Agent Rowan finished giving orders and walked over, her boots crunching on broken glass. Her gaze was assessing, moving from the carnage to the unlikely pair at its center. "The circuit is unraveling," she said, without preamble. "We've already moved on the locations from the recording. Judge Latimer was arrested at his country club. The Riverside shelter is secure. It's a clean sweep, Costa. Because of her." She nodded at Janice. Adamo gave a slow, weary nod. "And you?" "The charges were dropped the moment I provided your initial information to the right people. Internal Affairs had been building a case on Miller and Shaw for months. Your evidence was the final piece. I was never truly out of the game." She looked at him, her expression turning grim. "But now we have to talk about what comes next. For you." Adamo's hand tightened on Janice's shoulder. He knew what was coming. He had always known how this would have to end. "I know," he said, his voice low. He knelt down, ignoring the fire in his ribs, so he was eye level with Janice. The diner's neon sign, somehow still intact, cast a pink glow on her face. Her eyes, wide and too old for her years, searched his. "Janice," he began, his voice rough with an emotion he never allowed himself to show. "They have to take me in now." Her breath hitched. "Why? You're the good guy. You saved me. The world doesn't always see it that way, kid. I've done things, bad things, a long time before I met you, and I have to answer for them." He cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear that escaped. "But this is the only way. My cooperation, my testimony against the Gray Circuit, is the only thing that will ensure you stay safe forever, that you get a real life, with good people who will protect you. It's the deal I made." Tears streamed down her face now, silent and earnest. "I don't want other people. I want you." The words shattered something inside him. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as her small body shook with sobs. He pressed his face against her hair, breathing in the scent of childhood and innocence he had fought a war to preserve. "Listen to me," he whispered into her ear, his voice fierce and promising. "This isn't goodbye. It's see you later. When this is over, when I've made things right, I'm coming back for you. You won't ever be alone again. That's my promise." He held her until her sobs subsided into shaky breaths. When he pulled back, he looked at Maria, who was standing nearby, her own face streaked with tears. He gave her a single, meaningful nod, a transfer of guardianship, a silent plea. Then he stood up, his face hardening into the mask of Adamo Costa once more. He turned to Agent Rowan and held out his hands. "Adamo Costa," Rowan said, her voice formal yet not unkind. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, and a list of other charges we'll read on the way. You have the right to remain silent." He didn't hear the rest. He kept his eyes on Janice as the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He gave her one last, long look, a look that held every unsaid word, every story he'd never tell her, every ounce of a love he never knew he could feel before he was led away, disappearing into the wall of flashing lights. 17 months later, the door of the newly rebuilt Roscoe's diner chimed, a soft, welcoming sound. Afternoon sun streamed through the clean, large windows, illuminating walls adorned with children's drawings. The checkered floor was the same, but the air smelled of fresh paint and baking cookies. It was no longer just a diner. A small, discreet plaque by the door read, "The Janice Abrams Foundation, a safe place." At a familiar booth in the corner, a 9-year-old girl sat, swinging her legs slightly. Janice was taller, her hair was neatly braided, and the hollows of fear were gone from her cheeks, replaced by the soft glow of a child who felt secure. She was coloring, but her eyes kept flicking to the door. Maria, wiping down the counter, smiled softly. "He'll come, Mija," he promised. Just then, the door chimed again. Janice's head snapped up. A man stood there, silhouetted against the light. He was leaner, his hair a little shorter, and he wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans instead of a leather jacket. But the posture was the same. The quiet, solid strength was the same. It was Adamo. His eyes found hers instantly. The stone-carved features of the Mafia boss softened, and a genuine, quiet smile touched his lips, a sight few in his old life had ever seen. Janice slid out of the booth. She didn't run. She walked, her steps steady and sure, across the floor that she had once crawled across in terror. He met her halfway, crouching down just as he had so many times before. "Hi, kid," he said, his voice still gravel and smoke, but now warmed by a profound peace. Janice didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, holding on as if she would never let go. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, his own eyes closing as he finally, fully, kept his promise. He was home. She was safe. In the booth where it had all begun, a new story was starting. No child hides alone ever again. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.
А все равно, сути дела не меняет, зарплата плюс-минус везде там, больше, чуть меньше. И, наверное, это все, вот эта общая ситуация, наверное, у многих привела, во-первых, сфера развлечений, да, всякие там кредиты и так далее, настолько загоняют каждого в задницу человека. И об этом на самом деле никто так-то не говорит. Какое количество сейчас, допустим, даже в те же сложные времена такие, когда сейчас идет там специальная военная операция, да, где люди вообще умирают, в принципе, за какую-то сумму денег. То есть какая мотивация, то есть у мужика идти типа на войну, воевать и заработать денег? Потому что он в обычной жизни не понимает, типа, как реализовать себя. Он понимает, что он может пойти работать на какую-то работу, где зарплаты его все равно не будет хватать. Тут тоже двойственная сторона. Хорошо, когда она есть, плохо, когда ее нету. Да, вот это маленькая даже зарплаты. Но морально-то ты все равно подавлен. Ты понимаешь, да, я там пойду туда, но смысла мне этого не принесет большого. Да, у меня там станет, если я вообще не работаю и буду работать за 50 тысяч, хорошо, что они у меня есть, я смогу там покушать себе купить, но это же дизмораль. Когда ты заходишь в интернет и видишь, как люди там в Дубае летают, покупают себе огромное количество автомобилей какие-то, много всего такого, что ты за эту зарплату себе никогда в жизни позволить не сможешь. И как человеку оставаться морально типа сильным? Что ему нужно делать? Наверное, во-первых, это, наверное, все от семьи исходит, да? То есть, какая семья у тебя, как она построена. Если ты один живешь, это сложно, да, ты будешь сам себя, но у тебя, опять-таки, возможно, родители, если есть, которые друзья поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там, семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, ну, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. В чем, вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей, да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось, на данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушки такой, который у тебя есть, в хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Новстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такое вот. И эта борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Новстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку